So, Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
And so am I. Thanks, Cheryl, for having me.
Yeah, and so we met because one of our clients ended up on your podcast, and you have such an interesting business and background. I thought, oh, this would be perfect. I think our audience is going to learn a lot from you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was great, and the show that we did was really cool. So, yeah, I'm ready. I'm interested. Thanks.
Okay, well, so since I mentioned your podcast, tell us a little bit about it and how you started it.
Sure. So it's called When Science Speaks. And whensciencespeaks.com is the website. You can listen there or on your favorite podcast platform. And the purpose of the podcast is really twofold. One is to help people explain really complicated information in ways that's understandable and also interesting and memorable. And the people that I'm talking about are generally scientists. They don't have to be, they can be engineers as well. People who have complicated information that they want to communicate to important stakeholders in their world, like potential funders, policymakers, others who could influence whether their projects move forward or not. How do you reach them in a way that they can understand and get excited about so they can be supportive of your initiative? So that's the first thing, is about communication. How do you do that? And the second part is really careers. So I'm sure your listeners know, and you certainly know, Cheryl, that most people after getting a PhD do not stay in academia. It's only about 5% or less that actually continue on, and maybe there's some sort of, not necessarily even a tenure track, there might be, but not necessarily. But the vast majority of people go out into the world and take their PhD, earn skills in different places. And so sometimes it can be hard to make that transition. So I have people, or outside of academia, for example. So I have people on the show who have done that successfully, and they talk about how they made that transition and how they dealt with some of the obstacles, and then also how they seized opportunities to find professional, jobs that are fulfilling, interesting, meaningful, and all those good things.
I find the communication portion so fascinating because some of the most brilliant people that I've met are the worst communicators.
Right.
They may be able to do amazing things, but they are not able to talk or write about it very well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd say one, it's not their fault. And two, there's just a little interesting anecdote from Carl Sagan that I think really is illustrative of what you just said, Cheryl, which is that, people would ask him, Carl Sagan, the cosmos, the one who founded that segment or started, was the first host and really made talking about the stars and astrophysics really interesting and to people of all ages and backgrounds. And so of course he was always asked, like, how are you able to do that? Like, you're talking about astrophysics, like really abstract, complicated things. How are you able to do that? And he said, the topic and the subject area didn't come easily to him. And so he really had to unpack these concepts for himself and really take them apart so he could understand each of these little pieces and then put them back together in a way that made sense to him. And in doing that, he found that it also made sense to his listeners. And I think for people for whom a subject might come easily, they tend to skip steps in their own understanding because they just get it like instinctively. And Sagan said, like, I did not get it instinctively. And so as a result, I had to take it apart and put it back together, and I could explain it better that way. And so I think that that's some of the challenges that people who are really good at something, when they explain it, they skip over steps, and that can lose people easily. So yes, it's a common issue. It's completely understandable. And, most of us have that challenge in some areas of our life.
Yeah, I know. I even have that challenge. I've been doing, digital marketing for 15 years, and I think, oh, it's just so easy. And you throw around these like, oh, CPC and CPM and do this and do that and book it here and book here. And people are like, what are you talking about? Like, you forget that your audience doesn't have the same vernacular, the same knowledge that you do.
So true. Yeah, it is really true. It's very easy to do that. And I think part of it, like, because I'm sort of like a geek when it comes to like neuroscience and language. And I think part of it is like our brain wants to be efficient with the energy that we have and, wants to expend energy like when it really needs it, but when it doesn't, like it doesn't want to waste energy. So as we become really good at something, we sort of just, those pathways, I guess, have become really strong and well formed, and we just kind of go to the most efficient way. But then we forget there are others who don't have those sort of pathways in the brain yet, so we have to take it more step by step.
Now, a lot of our listeners write for their college president or, write for the news media. So they may be writing press releases about papers that their professors on campus have just published, or maybe they're explaining accreditation to a news reporter. What kind of advice do you have for people who are writing for others?
I love this because I spent about 20 years writing for one other who was U.S. Senator Ed Markey, and before that he was a member of the House of Representatives, so he was U.S. Representative Ed Markey. And so I wrote for, I wrote speeches, I wrote press releases. I was on the phone all the time with major media, TV and print. And some of the things that it's a challenge. That's number one. Number two, the more you do it, the better you become at it. And number three is like the tools that we have as writers for others, or explainers, if you will, are a lot of these rhetorical devices that have been around, excuse me, for thousands of years. Metaphors, similes, storytelling. Some of the things I think really help are understanding. Well, you want to use comparisons. So you want to take something that people understand already and then show how it's similar to something new. Just it's like jumping into a freezing cold pond. Like if we just go with the explanation and we don't give any context or orient them at all, and they don't have anything to sort of, warm up to, like your listener needs something that is similar to something new. And then from that point, you say, well, it's sort of like that, but actually, if we just add this, it's a little different in this way. Right. But if we go right, if we think maybe the most efficient way is just go right into explaining what this thing is, and then we take it apart and we talk about all the features and we don't talk about the benefits, which is another challenge. So using that, figuring out what metaphor, what comparison will be helpful is a big part of it. The other part I find is that you want to think about, like, I want to create imagery in my listener or reader's head. And to be able to do that, I have to refer to things that they know already. So that's like, your comparison. But also, I think many times we get tripped up with this. The specific is always more persuasive, more vivid than the general, right? If I talk about a Toyota Camry versus a car or a vehicle, right? The further I get away from the actual specifics, the harder it is, or the longer it takes for my listener or my reader to visualize it in their head, right? And so I always tell people, be really specific. So even when you're using your metaphors, you're saying, I was out there by the stream, in our neighborhood, and there was a lot of moss on the rocks, and I had to realize I had to, go from the bank to that first big rock that had the moss on it. I had to be careful. So I'm rather than just saying, like, I needed to cross this, this body of water one step at a time, so thinking about the second piece would be like this, being as specific as you can in your comparisons. So you're promoting the creation of visuals in your listener or your reader's mind, and that keeps them engaged because they're thinking about what you're talking about. And when you're specific, it makes it much easier for them to create those visuals rather than just generic terminology.
Oh, that's such great advice. And I know I always used to get frustrated when I would do like a presentation at the college I worked at. Maybe I was working on like a tagline or an advertising campaign, and I had done, research and testing, and I had all this like evidence to back up why my approach was correct. And then somebody would be like, oh, well, but I once had this student who, and it would be like one story that contradicted all the research I had done. And then it was like, okay, now I'm finished. This isn't going to happen now. Like one story could derail like all of that research and progress as people connected with it.
Exactly. And the two things you said that are so important from my perspective are connect and story, because our minds understand things in a narrative form much better than data. And there are good studies that show that, and you can imagine why that is. But we're kind of pre-wired to understand things in a narrative format. So if I start talking about there was an N of one, and then I'm using all of this scientific and research terminology, it's not nearly as memorable as if I tell you a story as an illustration, maybe at the beginning of our presentation, to get you sort of locked on and oriented to it, and then I can go deeper. Maybe I don't even go deeper to everyone. Maybe I just say at the end, if anyone wants to know all the details and the methodology and everything that we did as part of this, I'm happy to answer those questions, offline or right afterwards or something like that. The other thing about stories is that we tend to want to tell a story in a linear framework, sequence, I should say. So we want to start at the beginning and then get to the result at the end. But what I found and what I talk about when I do my course and my keynotes is that if you do that, people oftentimes are not going to get to that end of the line with you, because it's not that interesting till they hear the result, right? And so you really want to flip that and start with the result first, which seems a little awkward, and then fill it in with some of the lead up. It's almost like telling the punchline of a joke and then doing the setup. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. They're not going to really understand the punchline as well. And actually, that's true, and it's a positive, because you don't want people to fully understand everything at the beginning, because you want them to keep on listening to you. So I like to tell people, I like to encourage people when they're doing a presentation, both to start with the result, but also be a little vague. Like, I'm trying to think, like I sometimes will say, use a pronoun like, the sound shocked him. It's like, well, what sound was it, and who are we talking about? So I better listen to the next sentence, and they say, well, I want to give them enough information. I'm afraid I'm going to leave out details, but you don't want to give it all away at the beginning, because then your listener tunes out.
I love this advice, and I love it for speech writing. I wish I had talked to you years ago when I used to write speeches for my college president, because I was a news reporter, and I teach public speaking, but my whole background has always been like extemporaneous speaking. So writing a speech for someone else was challenging for me. I never knew how to structure it or what the audience was going to like latch onto or enjoy the most. So it was always really difficult for me. Um, as a former speechwriter and now coaching others that do that, how do you even start? Like, how do you start writing speeches for other people? Like, what's some tips that you have?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I just say is, being a news reporter in extemporaneous speech is super hard.
Oh, I
Um,
find it so much easier.
you know, because
Because,
it's like the light goes on
right.
and like the camera's right there, and like you have to be able to not only do it in a way that's interesting, but do it in like fit it into really tiny amount of time, right? You don't have a lot of airtime potentially, depending on what you're doing, I suppose. But I would just say hats off to you for doing that, because that's really, really hard, to be able to distill something like that. I would say, as a speechwriter, there's sort of the technical, like researchy part of it, and then there are the mechanics of it. Maybe a little bit on the researchy part, because sometimes people forget about that. Like, I would always want to connect. Like, I'm doing a keynote at the end of August for Harvard Medical School, so I've been working on this for a while, and as part of it, I want to talk to, and I did, a few months ago, people who are going to be in the audience,
Mhm.
right? What do you want to know? I actually just cut a video and sent it, which they'll use as part of the promotion, which invites listeners, or people in the audience, to email me. It's very easy. They can see my short video. Hey, here's who I am. I'm excited. I'm really fired up. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about that. And tell me one thing you want to get out of my keynote speech. And so I'll get some emails back, even if I only get a handful. Usually I get, 3 or 4. It's just good for me to get some engagement. Plus, I've talked to people who will be in the audience, so I know more specifically, and I knew for months what else, what they really, what the framework of it is. So the researchy part, people say know your audience. I don't use that term. I don't like it, because I think it's so like, what are you supposed to know about your audience, and how do you use it, and so forth. So I talk about connect before you communicate, and that's like connect on a human level with people. So you can do the researchy part. Can I talk to a few people who are going to be in the audience, or people who maybe have addressed if people who have talked to this group before, or you're talking to like the leader, the person who is your point of contact. Like what do you, I always ask also, like, what do you want the audience to feel at the end? Energized, empowered, optimistic, hopeful. People usually people don't say we want them to feel really bad and down, and say, well, maybe you should get another speaker. But no, people say it's some positive emotion. But I think if you're writing speeches, ask yourself, like, how should the audience feel at the end, right? And then the other thing is, because that will help orient, how you're going to write. And then the other thing is, you don't want the audience to feel that emotion, whatever it is. You don't want them to feel that throughout the entire speech, because it gets numb. They get numb to it, right? And so I always like to organize my speech into different chunks where they're feeling different things. Like they're informed. Oh, that's enlightening. That's surprising. Oh, that's really sad.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. And then at the end, and then it's energizing. So otherwise we get bored. We want to feel different things.
I love that. So you have so many good sayings, and there's one thing that you said to me when we talked a couple months ago, that I want to repeat. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, I now have the saying on a post-it note on my computer. So I'll tell you what it is. How do higher education decision makers find the right solution when technology evolves at light speed? Well, we usually start with our network. EdTech Connect is the network that's democratizing the higher ed technology conversation. EdTech Connect is free, so anyone with a .edu email address can sign up and list the software and services they use in their role at their school. Once you're in, you can find out what solutions similar schools are doing all over the country. Whether you're looking to find the hot new AI tool, or maybe learn options you have to upgrade your campus search engine, or even get to your short list of marketing solution vendors, EdTech Connect is the place to go. So visit edtechconnect.com and set up your free profile to get a pulse for what's happening with higher ed technology today. Okay, welcome back. So, okay, here's the saying that you said to me, that it's literally on my post-it notes on my computer. And it was in reference to talking about how you can be a resource for elected officials. And we were chatting about your career and talking about how colleges need to do a better job engaging with their government, particularly their local government. And you said, I love to tell people that when it comes to government, to be a resource and not a request. And I really loved that saying, because I thought, my gosh, all the times that we wanted officials to come to campus, it was always a request. And it wasn't until we started to serve them and provide them with assistance that they began to take more interest in what we were doing on the campus. Yeah. So I just love that saying. I also love that you said connect before you communicate. So I'm writing all your little sayings down.
Yeah, that's an occupational hazard from working in the hills so long. Everything could be reduced to a tagline. I mean, you know a lot about taglines.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the taglines are memorable. But I think that one really hit the nail on the head, because especially with community colleges, which are the majority of the people listening to this podcast, government relations has just been kind of thrown onto communication directors' already full plates. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them don't know how to be a resource. They've never had to do this before. So I'd love for you maybe give examples or explain like tips to get your local officials more interested in what you're doing at a college.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, in fairness, like these are non-obvious. I spent 20 years working in the U.S. House and U.S. Senate. So I've seen this, and from, in Massachusetts, where we have a lot of colleges, universities, community colleges, and so forth. So I think the first thing to always ask yourself is, why should the elected official care about what we are doing with this particular initiative, right? Is it being done at first of all, you figure out which elected official would care. Well, probably the one who represents the district or state in which you're located. That's the first threshold question. And I think your folks listening know that already. So then it's like, well, what about this particular initiative where we want to get the elected to come to our campus for something? And you're just thinking about, well, let me see. Well, what is the initiative? Okay, well, it involves chips. Like it involves computer chips. Okay, that's a big topic these days. There aren't enough chips, and we've got AI coming and all that. Well, guess what? We have a research lab that's doing some work on computer chips. And so then I say, okay, well, who's the elected? You've got a member of the US House who represents your community college, say, and then you've got two US senators, of course, for your state in which you're located. And it's like, well, what have those people been talking about recently? Oh, I see, they have a statement on the CHIPS Act, or they've done, they were just visited somewhere, or they're on a particular committee, which is another one that involves a committee whose jurisdiction, whose coverage includes high tech, which includes, say, computer chips. So, right away you're thinking, okay, well, this member of Congress does care about computer chips, and we are doing this really cutting edge research on computer chips. So I'm already like further answering the question of why should this particular elected official care about what we're doing? And now we sort of switch to the resource way of thinking about this. So I call up, I'm a communications director at a community college. I call up the office and I say, I'm so and so from XYZ Community College and I always would say, put in the town, from, Springfield, everywhere, California, which of course that town is within the district of, say, the US representative. And I'd like to talk to the press person about a nation initiative that we're working on. Or you could take it, you could either say, I like to talk to the scheduler, because you're talking about an event. So either way, but the idea is that your approach here, once you get the right person, is we're working on something your boss is interested in. We're working on something here that your boss has done a statement on, introduced legislation on, had an amendment about, done an event on. We are doing something here that basically could help your boss further their agenda on an issue where they already care, right? Because they've done these things. They've already taken action. Oh, I saw so-and-so at, your boss at the committee hearing, and you can get all these things online too, or just search on their website. And the boss was talking about computer chips. And guess, we actually have a lab in the district, which is doing something really innovative. We're thinking about maybe having an event on it. Would that be something your boss might be interested in? So as a staffer, and I was for so long, I'm thinking like, this is something the boss is spending, time, of course, it's kind of a cliche thing, but it's so true, right? Time is our most precious asset, but on the Hill, it's ridiculous how many things get crammed in such a short amount of time. Which makes getting attention difficult. But now what you're already sort of doing, this is where the resource part comes in, because the boss has already said and has taken action on this. So you're giving the boss something that the boss can then further, use to further their leadership on this issue, right? And they're always looking to demonstrate that they're effective. And so this is where, like, I'm kind of doing you a favor. I'm giving you an opportunity to come to an event on an issue where your boss has already expressed some interest to further demonstrate his leadership. And oh, by the way, we'll have press there. And of course, this falls within the communications director's like sweet spot as well. And so I guess the last piece there, so you see, like, I'm kind of giving you an opportunity. It's not even that I'm asking you to come to something. I'm actually offering something to you that you already view as valuable, which is a chance to continue talking about something you care about and get some press. And the last piece, and Cheryl, rambling is definitely a part of my professional kind of, talk. So I'm sorry if this is going on and on and on, but I'm just trying to answer the question. And the last piece I would just say is, that when you have the event, if you did a panel, for example, which I found to be very attractive on the other side, was on Capitol Hill, it's almost like the boss comes in, you've already got experts, you've got people from your community college who are there, other, maybe industry people, and then the boss basically comes in, the elected comes in, they give their little opening statement, welcoming people. They're kind of just the moderator. So it requires very little work on their end. And then you can partner with their press people to get press there, and you can already have some, folks lined up. So at the end, as a staffer, I'm looking at this as a great opportunity. And then, of course, we can build on that so that next time something comes up on this area, like, hey, maybe we should call community college because that event was so great.
Okay, first of all, I love the rambling. I think it's
You may be the only
fantastic.
one. You may be the only one.
You're a podcast host, and so I always tell my guests, this is about you talking, not about me. So thank you for for talking. But what really stood out to me, which is such fantastic advice, is that you aren't leaving it up to the elected to make the connection of why they should care. You've done your homework and you've already determined why they should care. And so, especially if you're speaking to a staffer, you're saying, hey, I saw that your boss is interested in this, or and da 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 da. So, we're not assuming that they'll make that connection, we're making it for them. And I think that is so important. And I would always get questions on my campus like, why aren't reporters interested in covering this event? And it's because I could never find out why they could care. Why will they care
Mhm.
about it?
Mhm.
So if you can't demonstrate that, you're not going to get the response that you hope for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And there are so many things going on the campus, and maybe you can't get pressed for all of them, but if you can do a little research, and sometimes it just involves going to the elected officials' website, pressing the press tab, newsroom, whatever it's called, tab, and then seeing what press releases have they put out recently on what
Right.
topics, because clearly they're trumpeting things that they care about.
Yeah, I know we worked with a college, we did a marketing campaign. They had a new mechatronics program. And I'm like, this is all in the news right now, how the legislature is trying to fund more semiconductors here in the United States. You're starting a program in Silicon Valley. Like, this is ripe for, media attention and attention from your local officials. And the college just couldn't like wrap their head around how to do that. So we did the marketing and that filled their classes up. But I always have thought like it was such a missed opportunity, especially in terms of having a local official come and see this new program because it's such a timely topic.
Yeah, yeah. Another easy way to figure out what the boss cares about, in addition to newsroom, is looking to see, it's usually in their bios, which committees they're on,
Right.
right? And then once you do that, you kind of see, oh, okay, now I'm getting a sense of their agendas. Maybe they're on the ag committee. What are we doing in ag? Maybe they're on the commerce committee. That has great jurisdiction. It has like technology and healthcare and all these things. What are we doing in those areas? Right. And then the thing is, if you then do what we talked about, what I was mentioning earlier about calling up, and this is already important to the boss, well, you start to build a relationship there. So it's like, don't just be a resource, not just a request, and then build a relationship,
Right.
because it becomes like, oh, they were really great. And then it's like, oh, well, guess what? They're having a hearing in that committee. And that professor from the community college who was on that panel with the elected, like maybe he would be, or she or they would be really good as a witness for this hearing we're having in 3 weeks on this topic.
Yeah, and that's exactly what started happening when I was at my college. We had a great relationship with our local state assembly member, and he helped pass legislation to support some of our faculty with maternity and paternity leave. Like he was just great, super interested in what we were doing, and we'd always give him opportunities to come to the campus when press was there. And then pretty soon he would call us while he was in Sacramento, being like, hey, this is up for debate. How's the college feel about this? How's the president of the college feel about this? There were sometimes
Yeah.
I'd be like, I don't know how he feels. Let me go ask him.
Yeah.
But it really became like a two-way relationship.
That's exactly it. That's your ideal. That's the 10, the 10 out of 10. And I would also say for community colleges, and being on the other side of this, like colleges and universities have a built-in credibility there because they're viewed with respect. They're viewed as being like non-partisan. And so elected officials like to be associated one way or the other with colleges and universities. So you have a lot of power. I know you probably feel like sometimes these, listeners may feel, well, I'm calling to just a hat in hand to go to the local official, but that's really not the way it's viewed on the other side sometimes. And there are ways to reframe that thinking so you have a much more productive and hopefully repeatable process. And just like you described, Cheryl, that's the relationship you want ultimately, exactly the one you described.
Oh, I can't tell you how many of my clients are like, I hate pitching reporters, I hate pitching electeds. But I think you've given us some reason to really think you're being helpful. You know, you're not just asking them to show up to something they don't want to come to. Like, if you can find a way to be helpful, then everybody wins.
It's so true. And with reporters, because I did a ton of this, and part of it is it's a similar kind of assessment. It's like, why should this reporter care? Well, what are the last 5 stories they've written? Like, you don't, I know sometimes it can be more challenging if people are like general assignment or whatever. But like, this is your history more than, on that side, on the media side, is, well, like I've covered, this is sort of my beat, or I've covered this. And so I'm giving you a new story in an area where you've written that could sort of also maybe generate interest in your previous stories in this area, which would be great too. So yeah, I mean, finding the right person to pitch to is definitely as important as the pitch itself.
For sure. Well, I have gotten so much out of talking to you. I really appreciate your time. I think some of our listeners would love to learn more about you and your business. So tell us where they can find out more about you and some of the other things that you do that maybe colleges would be interested in.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you could always start with bayerstrategic.com. So Bayer, like the aspirin, bayerstrategic.com. You can always connect with me there. The other thing is I like to be helpful. I love working with universities. I work with big universities, research universities all the time. And, explaining complexity is a problem that many people have. And so I have like a handy dandy lead infographic, really. It's 11 keys to translating complexity. It's free. Yes, you put your email on, you may get an opportunity to or read my newsletter. But if you want this 11 keys PDF, 11 keys for translating complexity, you just need to go to complexitymadeclear.com, complexitymadeclear.com, and then you put your first name, your email, and then you'll get these 11 keys to translate complexity, which I've been told are really, really helpful. So I hope they would be helpful for you. In addition to the keynotes I do on connecting, how to talk to elected officials, I do workshops on how to do that, how to connect with your local officials as well. I've done them all over the country. And then I also have an online class, which is called How to Effectively Communicate Your Science to Any Audience. And I'm about to launch an on-demand version of that live course that I've been teaching for 5 years. So if you are interested in some or all of these things, you can go to bayerstrategic.com and connect with me there. Happy to point you to other resources or explain other ways that I might be able to support the work that your listeners are doing, which I really respect and I'm immersed in all the time. I love it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's just been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Same here, Cheryl. Thanks for having me.